Hi, Marina Webster, your host for Inspiring OSA TV. And today I'm going to interview Danielle Neves. Welcome, Danielle.
Thank you, Marina.
Danielle is an author of a book, Crazy Beach, a portrait of domestic violence. So, Danielle, can you tell me about your book and why did you write it?
I wanted to get people in the general community to connect with the unrelenting horror that a lot of women experience when they are living with domestic violence. And at the time that I started writing this book, I was actually working as a domestic violence court advocate and had the privilege of going out to a small Aboriginal community in the south coast called Wallaga Lake. And we performed a domestic violence performance piece called An Interview with Domestic Violence, where we talked about the tactics that domestic violence used. And it was really interesting because by separating this experience from women in that community, they began to talk more openly about the abuse in their community. And that got me thinking about using fiction to get this message across. The book actually flicks between two main characters. One is Pete, who is incarcerated for the murder of his ex-partner. He writes a series of letters trying to make sense of how he came to be where he is. His ex-partner writes a series of letters about her experience and how trauma has changed her. Each of these letters is preceded by a fictional newspaper clipping about an actual domestic homicide that occurred at the time that these characters are describing the events that occurred. Now, the book is driven somewhat by the suspense of the reader trying to find out how Pete ends up where he is and how his ex-partner's letters come to reach him. And the conclusion to this suspense is uncompromisingly, I guess, shocking, but it serves as a comment on the system's inadequacy in responding to domestic violence.
So all the characters are completely fictional? Or just based on...
somewhat fictional, based on some of the stories that I heard as a domestic violence court advocate, yeah.
Okay, so can you tell me more about the characters? How you actually just developed the characters in the book?
Well, one of the things I used to find when I was working in the courts is that you'd hear a lot of unique stories, but there were certain themes that came out in the narratives of perpetrators of violence. And there was always an excuse for their violence. They were often men who really exalted the women that they were with at the start of the relationship, and that became part of the dynamic of degradation, because this woman felt like she'd been exalted at the start, treated so well, and couldn't understand why her rights were being gradually eroded within this relationship. The other thing is that these were almost invariably men who had difficulty with complex emotions and who found, were often found to be saying things to their partners like, this child is not mine, and denying perhaps the paternity of their children, but would also be the ones who were most strident in fighting for children's custody at the end of the relationship. So Pete was based on, trying to create a character who would communicate these basic themes, but who was also really authentic and frank in his justifications for violence, rather than, providing the excuses that we sometimes hear around, this being an anger management issue, or this being a drug problem or whatever else. I wanted Pete to really communicate the fact that he didn't respect his partner, because I believe that underlying the abuse of women is really, a certain immaturity and a certain attitude to women that enables it to happen.
Yeah, so a lot of psychology involved.
Yeah.
You described a lot of psychology in your book.
And in terms of Pete's ex-partner, who is only actually ever named at the end of the book, and the reason for that was that in her partner's eyes, in a sense, she wasn't a person. She was always she, or the missus, or the crazy bitch, as the title alludes to. The message that I was trying to get across with her, I think, was the way that trauma had shaped the person that she became, and really challenging the reader to question whether she would have been that person had that trauma not happened. And also, one of the things that was really important in crafting the female character in this book is that I didn't want her to be perfect. And there are times in this book when she does things that are quite challenging, and she isn't necessarily a likeable character. But if the right to be safe in our own homes is a human right, it shouldn't depend on us being perfect. It should be afforded to all women. And if violence against women in the home is never okay, then there can't ever be a reason, that she might have asked for it. So that was one of the themes that I really wanted to challenge readers to think about with this as well.
But the main message that, okay, you went through this challenge of domestic violence, but in the end, you kind of accept that and become a stronger person.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, Danielle, what is your solution to the problem discussed in this book?
That's a really difficult question to answer. But, in the community services sector, we often talk about an interagency approach to domestic violence, which is basically talking about, police, welfare agencies, victims, women's services, family services, perpetrator programs, all coming together to respond to domestic violence, rather than thinking, okay, this is a legal issue, or this is a welfare issue, or this is someone else's problem. I think that's a really good start, but I think domestic violence is so multifaceted that we need a multifaceted solution. I mean, domestic violence thrives in communities that are patriarchal, and we are still very far from gender equity, even though things have come a long way. So working towards gender equity is part of the solution.
So basically education the public?
Absolutely. And educating children, and also challenging so much of the cultural stereotypes and cultural norms that may not explicitly but do implicitly teach our children about being in unequal relationships, and maybe calling that passion, rather than teaching our children about consent and equality in relationships. So I think, at that level there has to be change. I think our legal system does need to be more adept at responding to domestic violence. We have perhaps the fundamentals of the legislation down, but the way that the law is interpreted by magistrates and by police enforcing it isn't always helpful to victims. So there has to be a cultural change there. There's not, a quick silver bullet that solves domestic violence. I think it's a multifaceted thing that needs to be changed through education, through cultural change, through challenging, some of the stereotypes that are in the media and in our society as well as legal reform.
Yeah, so your book is really would become a great help for the public. Yeah.
Well, I think in the sense that it raises awareness of some of the issues that are going on, and for us to take on this problem as something important, we really as a community have to start to understand and see the dynamics of domestic violence better and have compassion for people who are experiencing it.
Oh, absolutely. So Danielle, do you have a website so people can go and see?
There is a website which is currently being developed. It is called www.domesticviolencebook.com. People can communicate via this website or via Inspiring Bookshop with me if they want to know more about the book. If you're wanting to purchase the book, it is available at www.inspiringbookshop.com. It's also available at some Dimmicks stores, through the Co-op Bookshop and some other independent bookstores.
And hopefully you're going to do a book launch soon?
Hopefully, yeah. It'll be really exciting.
Really exciting. Okay, so how people can contact you? Just through your website or basically through your website?
Yeah. I also do have an email if people want to reach me.
Yes, if you can put email,
Yeah, it's dan75n@gmail.com.
Okay, wonderful. And you are available for interviews, media interviews, or anybody wants to talk to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm really interested to hear feedback.
Thank you very much, Danielle.
Thank you, Irina.
Thanks for your book and thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.